you know when it's ready.
And the recording. All right.
Not yet. I'll let you know when we go.
Okay, family, welcome. I hope you're having a good day. I hope you're having a good year. Listen, 2021 is not 2020 and it's not 2019. It is a year full of new mercies, new blessings, new abundance, new challenges, new changes. All things are new. Matter of fact, we just spent an hour talking about how to be new, how to do new. And so we just had a webinar, the first episode of season 3 of the new Church Hacks webinar series, where we talked about how to restart, re-engage, revision, how to be the best post-pandemic church that we can be. It was fantastic. So jump over to newchurchhacks.com to see the playback and the last 2 seasons, because there's still amazing, valuable stuff about leadership, being anti-racist, how to engage community, all sorts of stuff that we talked about in the past couple of years. You do not want to miss it. Matter of fact, call a watch party this coming Friday night. Gather around the YouTube, wear your mask, social distance in the living room, and make sure you tune into some New Church Hacks. Listen, I want to introduce you to these amazing people who we have in the room today. I'm gonna start with my man Nick and give him a chance to introduce himself. Nick Warnes, please tell us who you are, where you are, how we need to understand the amazingness of Cyclical.
Oh, come on, man. Keep that bar low now. Let's keep that bar low.
Can't do it. Can't do it. I'll keep you around for a reason.
So I'm married to Whitney. I have a 3-year-old son. His name is Lee. We live in Northeast LA. Looking forward to Terrell, to you, and Jose coming out this way, getting to hang here, and hopefully a couple of 6 weeks, something like that.
Sure.
I'm the director of Cyclical LA, which was the first cyclical ecosystem. We began with working with denominations to create and sustain ecosystems for starting new churches. We've been doing that for about the last 5 years. And now we've been kind of forging our way into working with other parts of the church as well, not just new churches. And that's with Cyclical Incorporated, where I'm the executive director of Cyclical Incorporated. So we host, partner with to create 21 ecosystems around Canada, the United States, Europe, and Africa, and helping faithful innovators of all sorts, business leaders that are faithful innovators, liturgists that are faithful innovators, artists that are faithful innovators, church starters, certainly, and then lots of work now with working with existing churches to create environments of experimentation for the purpose of making new disciples and better engaging with neighbors around the world. So yeah, thanks for including me. Appreciate being here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, New Church Hacks, the whole thing about New Church Hacks is that we are helping churches from start to restart. And Juan, I heard you say a few moments ago in the webinar like that, we should always be restarting. Everything should be restarting over and over again. And this is how we can live into the newness of who we are from our Creator. So Juan, please introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about what you do and who you are.
Well, thanks, Terrell. My name is Juan Sarmiento. You don't have to roll the R's. Don't worry about it. You can call me Juan. But I live here in the City of Angels, Los Angeles, or as some call it, LA. But and I have the privilege of serving as the executive presbyter, kind of the facilitator of a community, a partnership, a collective of churches of about 25 longstanding churches, around the same number of new churches that we are partnering with Cyclical in getting started, new worshiping communities in our Presbyterian tradition. And just seeing that these could be the best times for the church. It really could, because there is great opportunities for us to refocus, restart, and re-enter, re-engage our communities. And excited about what I got to hear in the Church Hacks and with this wonderful group of people.
Man, not as excited as we heard about what you had to say in the Church Hacks. They were fantastic. We thank you so much. Now, our sibling Joy, thank you so much for being here. I think you were with us a year ago when we talked about how to connect with community from your couch. So we love you here.
Right, you're actually sitting on couches. That was cool.
That was so fun. Yes, absolutely. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Well, I live in South Minneapolis with my husband, Brad. We're new empty nesters. And we both work from home. So he's been working. We've been together 24/7 and we still like each other. On a serious note, I live about 2 miles from where George Floyd was killed, and it was our community that experienced the unrest last summer. And so we're going through a lot of the anniversaries right now. So it was a transformative time for me and my family for sure, and for many people that I know. So
Yeah.
I feel like that's in the background in a good way of all the work that I do now. Well, I'm a consultant, coach, and trainer, also an author. So there's a new book coming out called Real Connections, Ministries to Strengthen Church and Community Relationships. I'll put that in the chat. It's with Judson Press. That's focused on helping church members make a deeper connection with each other so that we're not just running past each other at church all the time. It's one of the main reasons people choose and stay at a church is that they have been able to make friends and make a connection with somebody. And also extending that out into the community, your own neighbors and the neighborhood around your church, to build relationships and partnerships. My work focuses mainly on churches and nonprofits that want to turn the corner or restart or start something new. So I do a lot of strategic planning and visioning processes for groups like that. And with churches, I have 25 or more years of experience starting new community ministry programs, including starting church-based nonprofits. So programs to combat homelessness, housing programs, childcare centers, school partnerships. It's just been a real mix. I work with churches on identifying sort of the sweet spot for them and starting new ministry and helping them get that started. And then with the new book, consulting and training around how to make your church more relational. So when people attend, they're actually able to make a connection with somebody so that you're shaping your program so that that can happen. So that's me.
For me, it's all about relationships. Matter of fact, I think that for God, it's all about relationships. I often say that God is so pro-relationship that God built relationship within God's self. From the very beginning, God came out of the box like, it's the three of us. So relationship is where it is. I heard you say something about friendship. What if we build churches where people could be friends?
Yeah.
And we make it about the friendship that we have with Jesus Christ. Speaking of friends, I have to introduce my friend, one of my best friends, who also is a friend of this ministry, the Reverend Dr. Jose Martinez, who is going to help us guide this entire conversation. And he's the Associate Minister of New Church Strategies. What else do we want? Because we could take up this whole time going through your, your portfolio, your resume, but let us know a little bit about who it is to be Jose.
Well, yes. So other than New Church Ministry, I am also a chaplain in the military, also chaplain in a hospital. So, we've been really busy in the hospital setting with the pandemic. And so how apropos for having this conversation of what is it going to look like restarting or starting up again when it comes to our communities. And so with that in mind, I kind of want us to kind of frame this conversation around Lifeway Research Center came out with their study back in May 25th of this year, talking about the epidemic that's going on with church closings in our society right now. So much to say that they took numbers from 2014 to 2019. That's about as far as they can go with the trend. And so here's the trend. So in 2014, we had a net gain of 300 churches all around. So no matter what denomination, what church planting network you were part of, we had a net gain of 300 churches. And then in 2019, before the pandemic, it was down to negative 1,500 churches. So there were more churches closing than opening or planted, that sort of thing. And so if we're going along that trend with the pandemic throwing this collective traumatic experience, as is what I've been calling it, COVID-19, a collective pandemic or traumatic experience. And then peppering with the political environment, peppering with the racial disparity events that occurred in gun violence and everything to that nature. Surely that the pandemic is causing more of a church decline. So with that question, that kind of overarching this conversation for the future, let's go with you, Joy, that you were talking about. There was a need for us to kind of collaborate together and kind of walk with each other in our grief and that sort of thing. So can you expand a little bit more on how important for us to kind of come together would be with that?
Yeah, and I should say Heidi Unruh co-authored this new book with me. And we've been talking about what would it look like for us in church to process our COVID year together. So we can't just say, let's pick up where we left off 15 months ago, because we've all been transformed. So, and the other thing I think is, as all of these things have happened around us, are we even talking about it in church? So here in Minneapolis, we didn't really have much of a choice. We had to talk about the racial reckoning that was happening, because was literally happening, started in our own backyard. So fortunately, our pastors were wise enough to preach on that, set some context around it. We were having conversations about it. I don't think talking is enough, but it's a start. It's better than not talking. And so are we, when people come into our churches, are we talking about the things that they're thinking about and reading about and reacting to every day? Or is it like going into another universe where none of those things are present? I think as far as processing things internally in church, I just think creating some space for people just to sit one-on-one even with somebody they don't know that well, because we all tend to head towards our friends at church. So can we create a habit of heading towards people we don't know that well and just talk about what this last 15 months has been like? What was it like to be a parent trying to work full time plus sit there with my kid all day trying to do online learning, and they weren't liking it or getting it very well? What was it like to lose my job? What was it like to lose a family member? I mean, I lost a first cousin early in the pandemic to COVID. What was it like to lose graduations? Both of my kids were supposed to graduate last year. Neither one of them had a graduation. I'm kind of feeling that now, because I've been grateful this whole time that I didn't die and I didn't lose my job and all that. And then the joys of it too. So what's the spiritual growth that happened? What did I realize about myself? Do I have a clear direction about what I want to do next? Maybe it's different than what I thought before. So I just think there is a lot of grief. There's frustration that's going to come out. Some of that's about church. So one of my colleagues said everyone's mad at their pastor right now. So you could probably see some of that come out. But how to help people process that in a constructive way, I think, is really important. So.
Yeah, that speaks to my heart, because in chaplaincy, in the chaplain world, that's what we're all about, is about listening to other people's stories and how trauma have affected their lives, that sort of thing. So, and I think the church has an important role to play into that, because that speaks to me into the spiritual health realm, and that's the church's wheelhouse. We're about spiritual health and develop practices to kind of move through the grief, to move through lament, that sort of thing. And so, which brings me to my next point for you, Nick. What I really loved, what you brought about was this COVID quadrilateral. You had what you're going to continue, what are you going to discontinue, post and pre-COVID. And so, I think as the church, we need to kind of look at what we were doing before and what sort of things that we need to kind of develop or go back to, talking about ancient practices, looking into the church of the past. And so can you kind of give some examples that you've helped, planters or ministers to kind of go through that process?
I think that COVID quadrilateral is so important for individuals to do, like I said, and then churches can do it, church leadership teams. It's just a really concise and tight way to get a kind of wide landscape look at your own life or other people's lives. So we've been taking a lot of our church starters with Cyclical LA through this. It all actually rooted out of my own therapy. I was just talking to my therapist. I was like, oh my gosh, there's a total quadrilateral here. This could be helpful for folks. But the part of the nuance of it is you got to think about pre-COVID, what's happening pre-COVID. And so pre-COVID for me, I was traveling so much that it was wearing me down. I didn't want to do it anymore. Now coming post COVID, I'm not going to travel as much, and I'm committed to that. I'm committed to that with my family. I'm committed to that for my jobs, and I'm grateful for the opportunity that as exhausted people are of Zoom, that people are more into the rhythm of Zooming now. What I can't wait to bring back about in COVID, I don't know about you all, but I am a flaming Enneagram 7. I can't wait to get out to get the good food, the good drinks, the good times with good friends. I am dead set committed to budgeting way too much money for food and drink out with friends coming out of COVID. During COVID, so it's actually not pre and post COVID, it's pre-COVID and during COVID on that quadrilateral. So that's important to know. During COVID, something I picked up was walking. I walked everywhere. I'm in Eagle Rock, Northeast LA right now. I walked every single sidewalk of every single street in this entire neighborhood and the 3 neighborhoods all around it. I'm gonna keep doing that. I'll be on meetings. I was on a meeting with Juan yesterday, and I'm just walking during meetings. I'm walking my kid around. I'm walking my dog around. I'm meeting my neighbors doing that. I love it. And then something I'm going to end that I picked up during COVID. I didn't sleep well. I need to focus on sleep for any number of reasons, which we don't need to get into a therapy session right now. I didn't sleep well during COVID, and I want to commit to getting better sleep. So that's just an example of me doing it myself personally. Do that with your church. Do that in community. Do appreciative inquiry with that. See where God's Spirit is aligning with other people and what God might be saying through that. But yeah, thanks for bringing up that COVID quadrilateral. I think it can be a helpful tool for people moving through and out of COVID.
Yeah, that's again, everything that you're saying is so hitting the mark. Hey, Terrell, you were about to say something?
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, this is impacting me so deeply, Nick. When we talk to congregations about their 5 areas of vitality, I add a 6th area that you really spoke about very well. So let me just quickly tell you the 5 areas of vitality for congregation. They are leadership, participants, community, platform, which a lot of times we talk about buildings, but now there are other platforms, and finances. Well, the 6th that I always add is the holistic health of the leader.
Yes.
Where'd
you get that term?
Exactly. I mean, that is exactly what you're talking about. Is being mentally well, is being spiritually well, is being physically well, the walking, the eating right, all those different things. You're talking about the mental health, sleeping properly, going to a therapist, the right environment, all of that. Like, we have to really put some energy into our holistic health as leaders and as just human beings altogether. I know you're on board with that, Jose.
Oh yeah, definitely. In the military chaplaincy world, we talk about the 4 domains of holistic health: physical, mental, spiritual, and social. So those are the 4 areas. The Army has the emotional health. We kind of combine that together with the social health, that sort of thing. But all those are very important. And again, it's the church's wheelhouse to help progress our community members to connect in that and develop relationships, as Joy put into her hacks. Juan, speaking of the quadrilateral and with Joy's developing relationships and helping people move through this stuff, one of the things that I find interesting about the hacks that you brought up was creating a new impact map. Can you expand more about what kind of things are we looking for when we're creating the new impact map?
Well, thanks, Jose. When I hear pastors mention with excitement the people that have moved out are now rejoining the church on Zoom and in their virtual offerings. And when I see people that have, other pastors that have moved out participating in our decision making, in some ways we have begun to ask ourselves how our view of parish has been expanded in these realities, how the relationships that we thought probably had dwindle or because of distance have been change. I mean, and I hear that from pastors in the Latino world. Right now, we are partnering with Cyclica in the beginning of churches that include people from 6 different Latino countries, which in the past was possible because of the diversity in the immigrant community, but never going back to those connections that were in real time. So that is probably something that comes to mind when talking about impact maps. I've talked to Christians in China, for instance, that used to be part of my area of responsibility in my previous ministry role, that being in such a large country, they were not in connection with one another, and others in the Chinese-speaking world, the Mandarin-speaking world, that they have kind of encountered each other during these times and found the amazing wealth that and the gifts that God have given them to share with one another. And I'll probably go as far as saying, I've lived in part of the countries where the disciples have a strong presence, but I had not had the opportunity to interact with people of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ as I have today. So, I love the ecumenical work that our forebears did, but I think I call this ecumenism 2.0. Or connectionalism 2.0, that is probably less centralized, but nevertheless as meaningful as some of the things that previous generations even imagined.
Yeah. So when you're talking about decentralization, to me, that's like some of the things that all of you touched on, is that in this pivot moment in our history, in the church history, in our church communities, that we're doing the shift, this pivoting because of our environmental issues, and so Nick, when we're talking about the leadership style, you brought up adaptive leadership and like the importance of this idea of being adaptive in this time. Can you expand more about how adaptive leadership can help your community kind of like pivot within this shifting within our culture?
I might do just a little variation on that. I think something that's important to note is that many of the leaders that were leading our existing churches had a much higher ratio of technical leadership as a part of their background and their experience. And then during COVID, they had to really increase the ratio of adaptive leadership. And quite frankly, I'm very concerned and prayerful for pastors who are continuing to dwell at a ratio of adaptive leadership that maybe they weren't ready for. So first of all, nothing but prayers, nothing but support, nothing but love there. Also, man, can we all up our habits of adaptive leadership as we move through and out of COVID. Doing technical leadership in the church, just implementing protocols, running the same church calendar, running the same programs. I mean, you all know better than anyone. It was not working to the point that we need it to be working. So the way forward, without a doubt, is going to include higher ratios of adaptive leadership. So for technical leaders who are more comfortable in that technical sphere, how can you up your game in adaptive leadership? How can you be surrounding yourselves with more adaptive leaders? How can you be doing exercises that open your imagination to what God might be having for not only local churches, but entire denominations, right? So, and the list goes on there. So foundationally, nothing but love for people who feel more comfortable in technical leadership settings. And man, I hope we can all just take at least baby steps toward higher ratios of adaptive leadership for the purpose of moving through and out of COVID.
I would say the book, Canoe in the Mountains was, so I don't know what you think about that, Nick. It's been out for a while now, but there's probably others that you can suggest. But that was a good toes in the water book for me to read to kind of understand the difference between technical and adaptive leadership. So for people for whom it's new. It's really focusing on skills around looking at the situation that you're in and the people that you have around you and adapting your approaches to fit the situation. So rather than saying, I learned how to do a worship service in seminary and by God, that's what we're doing. We're structuring it this way. We're, you know, all facing forward in a church building for an hour on Sunday and singing these songs. And I'm exaggerating, but anyway, I like that book a lot. I'm teaching it, and I'm teaching a couple seminary classes on innovation and leadership, and that's the book that I'm using. So.
That sounds really interesting. So Joy, like back to you on this partnering with different organizations and developing that community relationship. To me, it would take a very an adaptive leader to make those connections, and even recognizing adaptive leaders within your congregation to help you make those connections. Would you expound a little bit more on like the experimentation of connecting with those art groups or those other organizations within your community to develop a better holistic approach to the community?
Yeah, I think it all starts with listening. So when I work with churches on community listening processes, we form a team and we go out and do like 30 interviews, and we do some focus groups in the community. So it's, everybody always wants to meet with public officials, and now I say, no, we want to go meet with the social worker at the school. We want to meet with people at the Addiction Recovery Center, at the Youth Development Center, like the Boys and Girls Club. We want to go to the senior housing organization and talk to people about the needs of seniors. Sometimes we talk to the sheriff or the police officers. So really getting a sense of what's going on and where the assets of the community are and where the needs are. And then doing an internal process in your own congregation about, you know, like what keeps you up at night when you think about this community? What are you most passionate about? What do you do in your free time? And things rise to the top. So I worked with a church in Indiana recently and it was a church where there were a lot of people over the age of 60. So I don't know why I thought this wouldn't be the case, but they were like biking and hiking and camping like crazy, which none of those things are my deal. But I'm like, man, like cool ministry could come out of this. And there wasn't anything in that town other than like sports teams for the youth to participate in. And I'm like, what could you do around camping with the youth? So I think that's a way to start. And, you know, it's hard to convince people that they need to be more focused outside the church building unless you engage them in a process like that. So sometimes pastors will go in and just like, we think too much about ourselves. Let's start thinking about the community. Go, you know, nothing happens. Some people are like, no, we like just being here in church by ourselves. Somebody was on with me. I have 2 immigrants from Myanmar as my students this term. And they're like, you know, people in our small church just want to stay here, but we want to grow. I'm like, well, the people are like out there. So if you want to grow your church, you like have to go out there to meet the people, make a connection with them. And I find that the community partnering is a way to do that. And I don't think you have a ulterior motive in trying to invite everybody to church. Certainly you should be open to that, but just, you know, having an interest in knowing people in your community and in your church, like a curiosity about them and their lives and interest in their well-being is what I'm talking about.
Yeah, so it looks like when you're having those kinds of conversations, you know, it could lead into uncovering some certain social issues that might be underlying, especially when you're talking to different ethnic groups and racial groups within your community. And so Juan, whenever we're with your trend, or one of your hack was find the gaps behind the trends. And so can you expound about a little bit more as we're having these conversations with our communities and people from different people groups, can you expand a little bit more on that hack?
Sure. Well, I think that innovators do well at looking at trends, but I think the better innovators read between the lines of the trends, because I think that the trends is where everyone is going. And I'm not convinced that Jesus wants us to go where everyone is going. I think there is an element of countercultural kingdom, God's reign element that we need to be aware of. And then there are ways in which God is calling people that normally will be considered the least, the last, the lonely, and the lost. So I would say that missiologically, when we engage, it is important that we read the signs of the times, and we also see that there's another story to the prevalent story. I don't know. There was a video on the danger of a single story that was a TED talk, and our communities are made of a tapestry of stories that are intertwined, and some of these stories are not necessarily clear enough for everyone's eye to see, but nevertheless they are important in God's way of working. So I think I see some of that in, say, the genealogy of Jesus. If you are like me, impatient, you want to move fast through it and get to the bottom line, that is, Jesus was born. But the twists and turns of the story that brought about the birth of Jesus is, I believe, where the action is. So I think the church, is not only called to pay attention to the macro trends, but be close enough to people where we can discern God's work in ways that go often unnoticed. And that's where I talk about the gaps behind the trends, is that our neighbors might not necessarily fit in the major categories that we have, but they are nevertheless very significant and very important, and very much in our radar for some reason. So as a Presbyterian, I do tend to have an eye for people over 65, and I realize that sometimes innovators can neglect that significant and growing part of our of our population.
Yeah, very, very, very true. Like, I had an epiphany whenever I was in Germany. So last month I was in Germany for 6 months. Prior to that, for military chaplaincy, and I was all about, before I went to Germany, I was all about these buildings, they're holding us down. What's the purpose of these edifices? These edifices aren't the church, that sort of thing. And I was like, tear it all down and everything else like that. And so I went to in Germany, when they say lockdown, it's lockdown. There's no traveling, no visiting, sort of different castles or any of that jazz. The only things that were open were the grocery stores and the churches. And so one of these trips, I was able to go to Speyer, and in Speyer there is a cathedral that commemorates the Reformation. They call it the Reformation Church. And as you know, it's the 500th year of the Reformation. But within this cathedral, there's all these paintings and stained glass windows of the Reformation. Has Martin Luther, John Huss, all the big, John Calvin, all the big people of the Reformation on these stained glass windows. And then it had the story of the German lords that basically fought against the Catholic government for them to be able to be Protestant. And so as I'm sitting there, I'm like feeling the history of this building. I'm feeling like the hands that built this church was the act of worship for these folks to build this edifice. And so, you know, thinking about how back here in the American culture, how some of these older folks who have tended to the church, this was their form of worship, and here we are trying to mow it down and change everything, you know, because we want to be innovative and we want to be forward thinking and entrepreneurial, and we're just leaving them by the wayside, and that we need to set some space and time for them to share their story and to grieve and to prepare for their next stage of life, and then also have them the opportunity to pass on the leadership to the next generation. And so, needless to say, with all that, you know, within this pivoting time, there needs to be a sense of vulnerability for all of us. And in experimentation, there is vulnerability. In innovation, there is vulnerability. So, you know, Nick, when we're talking about that hack of creating an environment, a space for that experimentation to happen, what are some of the key things that you tell your planters or your folks that you're working with of how to create that environment?
Good question. Back to what you were saying about church buildings. One of my favorite sculptures in the world. I don't know if I can share screen right now, but if whoever's around can Google upside down church sculpture and share the screen. It's a church building with a steeple, and it's flipped upside down and stuck into the ground. And I think one of the best questions that I can use to engage with discerning church starters or discerning faithful innovators is, what do you think of that sculpture? Do you say amen? Or do you say, oh my God? And there's a continuum there that I want to engage with people. But ultimately, what you're saying, Jose, is that we need a balance. We need to remember that we're standing on the shoulders of the saints that came before us. And there are good reasons why communities built lavish church buildings. It was what they did. It was part of their community life. It's part of their fun. It's part of their hobby. And we need to honor that. So yeah, just bashing everything down doesn't make a lot of sense. So there's that. I think we're—
Hold on, Nick, before you get into that second question.
Yeah.
You guys are talking about not forgetting the people of the past. I'm very underplaying exactly what you're saying. But also, when we talk about these gaps that Juan speak of, I think that we are also very blind to a lot of the people gaps too. And to me, one of the major ones that we're blind to is that of the young people. So we're very much not including our young people in our church services before in an intergenerational way. But Zoom, church on Zoom and church on Facebook absolutely forgot about young people altogether. And they just, I don't know of any church, not that there weren't, I don't know of very many churches that were having like youth groups on Zoom or youth groups, and you know, which is odd because young people were already doing the whole digital thing in their gaming and the whole digital thing on TikTok. It's not like they knew this already. So there wasn't really a lot for the church to have to integrate them to or adapt them to. This was already very much part of their culture, but somehow we were blind to it. We didn't see this gap. We didn't do it. So I would really love going forward for us to, if we're going to be hybrid or if we're going to go back to whatever, if we're going to continue, whatever we're going to be in the future, that we pay very close attention to even those types of gaps.
Love it. Fuller Youth Institute has some good stuff on that right now. But yeah, you want to talk about the toughest job through COVID is youth pastoring. Holy cow. I appreciate the stories and the way those leaders do ministry. It's really incredible, but very difficult work right now.
Our youth group has really stayed about the same size, maybe a little smaller during this time, and they've been meeting outside the entire time, which is really saying something in Minnesota.
Yeah, that's some commitment.
But what I missed, so it's like, oh, the youth group's still happening, so the youth must be okay, but being totally disconnected from the broader church community was really significant for a lot of the kids. So it isn't just youth group and being around their peers, but it's all the adults that are surrounding them. So that's been one of the hardest things for them. So yeah, somehow we were able to meet in person. Everybody bought 3 more jackets and a better pair of boots, I guess, for the winter.
That's lovely.
Like they met on Zoom like 2 times or something. Because they had to do it a few weeks ago because it was raining or whatever. And usually there's 25 kids. We're in a church of about a little shy of 200 people.
Mhm.
So that's a good turnout for youth group. And when they switched to Zoom, it was 5 kids. So they're zoomed out. So yeah.
For sure. Jose, your question, 2 things stand out. I can go, a little further into depth, and I actually got to get out of here in 8 minutes and go pick up my kid at the little church around the corner. But number 1 is this idea of a skunk works. If leaders in your church can't wrap their brain around bringing innovation to the center of proximity and power, then move to the edges of the church and start a skunk works and just let them try things and give them space to fail, encourage them, pray for them, give them resources, all that kind of stuff. And then as that skunk works and they actually get some experiments that work, that thing will start to spin and start to move toward the center of proximity and power and hopefully transform the whole of the church. So I really like that one. And I'm biased here. I edited this, but Juan Sarmiento is the executive presbyter of the San Fernando Presbytery. That presbytery gave Rob Douglas space to create the book, The Missional Disciple Making Handbook. Rob did just a fantastic job of understanding the literature and curriculum of disciple making as it stands now, and actually tying disciple making to practice, and practice not by like having a Bible study or something, but practice as working together to discern the Holy Spirit in context and better engage with neighbors. So the whole thing really lands on people working together, and let's try and create an experiment and do it, actually do the thing. And then afterward, hold it lightly, just like a mature Christian will do, and say, was that terrible? And do we need to end that? Or did that have some legs to it? Do we need to scale it up? So I cannot recommend that book enough for people who want to get out there and start creating experiments.
Well, we're running short on time, so let's end with kind of like what Nick did. What's one key thing that you see for us to kind of move forward, or for a new church plant, a new minister to look forward to in this COVID-19 world, post-pandemic world?
Well, I will say that we see this as an opportunity to become more aware of what we're about, and not disregard the pain and the loss, but on the contrary, bring it closer to the center of who we are. I mean, baptism, the Lord's Supper, we call them sacraments in the Presbyterian tradition, but they remind us that we are a movement that embraces death and the pain of it, and embraces new life. And there's a former president that once said that of the United States, freedom is just one generation away from extinction. But I think that applies to the church. And moments like this remind us that it is all by God's grace, and that God's grace continue to carry us forward. And by God's grace, this is to be carried for generations to come.
Amen. Amen. Joy? Same question. You're muted, Joy.
It's never too late to connect with the community around your church. So if you haven't been too connected, or you don't know anyone, or haven't partnered with any groups in your community, start. And it's start with listening, and you're not going to know everything that you need to do, and there'll be bumps in the road along the way, but it doesn't have to be perfect. I just think getting out there and talking to people and finding out what's going on and figuring out how your church can fit in that is really important moving forward for the church.
Thank you so much for that. Terrell?
Yeah, absolutely. Mine is a little graphic. It's real simple. Don't eat the vomit. Okay, so Proverbs 26:11 says, as a dog returns to its vomit, so fools repeat their folly. And so what this symbolizes is revulsion. It's about excessive indulgence. And we had years of indulging on some things as a church that has now made us sick. The decline you spoke about earlier is the result of that sickness. And so now that we are regurgitating the illness that has caused our decline and our demise, let's not put that back inside us. And so we need to be able to walk forward and not just continue to do some of those things that were not to our benefit. That will be what I say we really need to do.
Wow. Well, with that, this has been a great conversation. I want to thank each and every one of you for participating in our church hacks. I mean, as we look forward to this post-pandemic world, and as we look into the next episode for the hybrid hacks, I'm really looking forward to what God has in store for us, because God is always moving. The church is not dead. The church is transforming. That's what I tell people, because God is always on the move, and we just need to find where God is going, and we'll follow. Amen. All right, Terrell.
All right. God bless you guys. Thank you again for hanging out with us for New Church Hacks, and we will see you next time.